Right here.
Oops. All right. All right. Well, good evening. Thank you. I think this is the 8th time we've met, if I'm correct, in the Lizette, or 9th, since the beginning of end of July, that in teaching statistics across any setting, just to hopefully just kind of chat and see what's going on. And so again, thank you for coming here today. We are lucky to have Ann Cannon is going to speak with us today. And before that, again, just some coming attractions. We have one speaker sitting in the audience with us right now. I got to share my screen though, don't I? I'll share my screen real quick. And Chris Olson is going to be speaking with us on the 30th, and this is really bad because my screen doesn't look very good right now. He's going to speak with us, if I'm correct, on November 30th. So we're going to take a 3-week break here because of Thanksgiving. And he's going to speak about SPLAT, Statistical Package for Learning and Teaching. And then we're going to end the calendar year on December 14th with Chris Franklin. And so at this time, I'm going to turn this over to Ann Cannon, and she's going to start today.
Well, hello. I think I know most of the people who are in the audience so far, but there may be others who are joining us or who will be watching this video later on. So I will introduce myself a little bit and say that I teach at Cornell College, which is a liberal arts college in Eastern Iowa. My undergraduate degree is in mathematics from Grinnell College, an hour and a half away from Cornell College. And then my master's and PhD are from Iowa State, both in statistics. And a little bit about Cornell, for those of you who may not be aware, we teach on a very different system here. We don't have semesters, we don't have quarters, we have blocks or terms. And there are 8 of them across the academic year from September through May. So each term lasts 3.5 weeks. That's 18 class days, Monday through Friday for 3 weeks, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And during that time, students only take one course and faculty only teach one course. And you know, if you're counting hours, in theory, our courses transfer to a semester school as 4 semester hour courses. So that means that the students are supposed to have had 150 hours between in-class time and out of class time. I don't know if you've ever done the math that figures that out for the Carnegie unit, but that's what it is. And so for me, that means that I'm teaching in the classroom or on Zoom now for somewhere between 3 and 4 hours a day, 5 days a week for 18 straight class days. And I teach pretty much what I would teach in intro stat if I were teaching on the semester system or if I were teaching on the quarter system or whatever. I mean, I think we all pretty much have a reasonable agreement on what is a course in intro statistics. And yes, it can be done. Let me start there. I've been doing it now. This is my 28th year here at Cornell. And I do think we are successful in getting students to learn some statistics. I think they probably understand about as much or remember about as much when they leave our classroom as they do when they leave your classrooms, whether you're teaching it in a year or whether you're teaching it in a semester or whether you're teaching it in a quarter. I also, because of the block plan, we have legislation at the college that says no class can be bigger than 25 students. And because of I teach in a computer classroom that is only big enough to have 24 computers. My courses are all capped at 24 students. But this is relevant to this talk today because when we are teaching on such a short time, over such a short time period, grading has to happen pretty much overnight, right? So I cover roughly 2 sections of a book a day, or maybe 3, depending on how it goes and where we are. Earlier in the course, I might get through 3 sections. Later in the course, it might only be 1.5 or 2. But that means that if I give them a quiz on one day, I can't wait until 2 days later to return that quiz, because by that point, we're in a completely different chapter and they need to get the feedback. But that's also true of papers. That's also true of writing. And when you have 24 students, giving meaningful feedback on writing takes time. And so I decided long ago that it was going to be too difficult on our system to do sort of the traditional statistics project, where they come up with an idea, go out and collect the data, analyze it, write a report, maybe give a presentation. Because to my way of thinking, to do that right, you need to scaffold in all different kinds of feedback, right? So meet with them all before they've collected their data and give them feedback, or at least have them turn in a proposal and give them feedback on that. And then have them share their data with you and have you help them with it and so forth. And on the block plan, when I still have to fit in quizzes and exams, there just isn't enough hours in the day for me to do this. So I settled on, I still think it's important for them to learn how to communicate. And so I settled on having them write papers instead, where I supply them with a data set and a writing prompt and ask them to turn in a paper. They do this twice during the term. The first one I scheduled to be due on a Friday so that I have the weekend to score it and get it back to them. The second one is actually due on a Monday, but it's the Monday of the last week of the term. And I don't have class Tuesday afternoon. So, okay, they don't get it back until they get their final, or until they take their final. But I figure that one they can learn from later. So I settled on the idea of doing these writing papers. I will first admit that when I first started teaching, which is back in the dark ages, I think, they weren't writing much of anything. Exams were pretty much right or wrong. We just didn't think about the nuances quite as much back then as we do today. And I think we've made great strides. It was probably in the early 2000s when I started thinking about having them write papers. And my first attempt at this was to, first of all, say, you're going to write 2 papers. Both papers are only going to be with descriptive analyses. I'm not going to worry about inference, right? We don't get to inference until the 3rd week anyway. Let's do something that should be fairly straightforward for you. Descriptive statistics are fairly easy to understand. The hard part is writing about them, communicating about them. So let's just do 2 papers that are descriptive statistics. And when I did that, I had the first one worth 40 points and the second one worth 60 points. An exam in my class is 100. So they combined, these 2 papers equal an exam. And I figured by having the first one worth 40 points, they can learn from that, right? There isn't quite so much emphasis on that paper. They can learn from it and then do better on the second paper. And so put the heavier weight on that second paper. And here's what happened. I would get really depressed because, yes, I would have decent analyses, but I would see writing like this. So first I created a histogram of the tail length of all the birds in the study. The resulting graph was skewed to the left and had 2 peaks. One peak was around a tail length of about 150 centimeters, and the other one was at approximately 220 centimeters. The mean tail length was 197.78 centimeters. The median was 214. The fact that the mean and the median were so different just strengthens the conclusion that the distribution is left skewed. The minimum value was 2.21. The maximum was 308. So the range of the values was 305. The normal probability plot suggested that the data was not distributed normally since the data formed an S-shaped curve rather than a straight line. Ugh, right? Who wants to read 24 versions of that paragraph and pages of that paragraph, right? And I tried so hard to tell the students what I was looking for. Number one, write it for an audience that cares. This particular data set, this really is a real data set. It's an assignment that I had given. And in fact, I wrote that paragraph after grading one weekend, right? I mean, students had asked me for examples of good and not so good writing. And I thought, how do you write not well? Well, you grade a lot of papers where the writing is not great. And then you just spew what you've been reading, okay? So I struggled with, how do I get across to the students what it is that I really want them to do? And I spent a lot of time talking to other folks like you guys, friends who are statistics colleagues across the country. I went to a lot of joint statistics meetings, papers that talked about writing. And one of the presentations that I went to, there were others that mentioned the same sort of idea, but one of the presentations that I went to was by Joy Jordan, who was at the time a faculty member at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. She has actually left the profession. She is doing something completely different now. But she had this great idea to give the students a much wider latitude to what they were their writing style, what vehicle they were going to use for their paper in air quotes, right? And so I thought about that a lot, and I decided that what I was really worried about, what I really wanted to emphasize, was that they learn how to communicate about statistics. I don't care whether they write it in APA style. I don't care what the vehicle is. If that's their stumbling block, if writing an academic style paper is their stumbling block, that doesn't matter to me so much. I want to see that they understand the statistics and can communicate it to an audience that would like to learn about the context that was driving the study to begin with. So I decided to give them lots of latitude about what a paper is. And I tell them in class now, the definition of paper is incredibly broad. It could be a letter home to your parents or to your siblings. It could be a blog post. It could be, this shows my age, a newspaper article, right? So, or a journalistic piece. It could be a pamphlet. It could be a short story. I've actually had students do children's books, and oh my God, are they beautiful? And they have done, they get really, some of them that I think would not embrace this assignment get really excited about the creativity that they can use in either writing a short story or doing a children's book or creating a pamphlet or whatever it is that they're doing. I find that I get much more buy-in. I'm not going to say everybody's excited about it, right? We all know intro stat students are not there because they want to be. They didn't choose that class because they were super excited to learn statistics. A couple of them did, but not very many of them. But this has helped me get more buy-in from the students. So as an example of one of my assignments, so the first paper, this is an assignment for the first paper, one of the possibilities that I'll give students. And this is a data set that I don't give on this assignment. I don't give the paper, but it comes from a paper where college students were asked to look at photographs of an opposite sex adult face and rate that person on attractiveness just by viewing the face. How attractive do you think they are? How trustworthy do you think they are? How faithful do you think they are? And then how a rating for sexual dimorphism. How masculine is a male face? How feminine is a female face? There were 34 females and 34 males who were doing the rating, and they each looked at, well, the females looked at 88 pictures of males and the males looked at 82 pictures of females. And then the average scores for each of those photographs was created. And so I give them some direction in the sense that I tell them what the response variable is. What variable are we most interested in learning about? And in this case, it's the faithful variable, right? So how can we predict how faithful people are judged to be based on their photograph? Is that related to the other kinds of variables that we have available to us? And by the way, there was one more variable that was in here, and that was whether the person in the photograph self-reported as having cheated on a previous partner. Okay. So what do I tell them to do? I give them the response variable, and then I ask them to explore relationships. I don't tell them how many explanatory variables they need to use. If they ask me in class, I say at least 2 or 3, right? Not just one. You need a couple at least. You need to think about the context. Remember that the whole purpose to this paper is talking about what you've learned from the study, right? It's all about human beings and how we interpret each other's looks, basically, in this case. And so you need to find a hook to your paper, right? Whatever it is that however it is you're forming this, you need to find a hook and make it an interesting read for somebody else who's interested in the results of this paper or this data set. I tell them, little things like, don't just include these paragraphs of numbers. I go through that paragraph that I just showed you a bit ago about the hawks. And I say, okay, y'all, do you want to read a paper that's just, paragraphs after paragraph after paragraph that's written like that? And they all go, no. Well, neither do I say. So let's make it interesting, shall we? Right? In fact, that PowerPoint, there's a second page where I give them at least slightly better writing. So the most striking characteristic about the tail lengths is their distinctive distribution. When looking at a histogram of this data, see below, we see that the distribution is bimodal, skewed left, and has some very low outliers. Several questions arise from this distribution. The first might be to question the bimodality. This suggests that there may in fact be 2 distinct groups of birds that have different tail lengths in our overall population. The smaller ones with tail lengths of about 150 centimeters and the larger ones with tail lengths about 230. One possible explanation might be the age of the bird. We know that our birds are classified as either being immature or adult birds. It might make sense that the immature birds are smaller and that therefore they would have shorter tails. Unfortunately, this does not seem to be the case, ... And I point out that there are still numbers in here. There are still statistical terms in here, and that's okay. But my focus is not on, and the mean is this, and the median is that, and the first quartile is this. It's, what can we learn about those numbers? What are we learning about the birds? I'm interested in these birds. What kind of birds have such big tails? Okay, right. So these are all birds of prey, by the way. But so I've gone through this with the students, and they have, this is a PowerPoint. They've got access to it on the college server. So going back to the assignment, you'll also notice that nowhere in here do I say anything about how long the paper is. And I know that people will disagree with me about this, and it always comes up in questions from the students. And my answer is always, as long as it needs to be. I'm not going to give you artificial guidelines that are just that, artificial, and have you change font sizes and play with margins to try to meet those artificial guidelines. And yes, I was a student once and I know all about that, right? And so what I really want you to do is tell me what you want to tell me, be complete, but don't be so long that you tell me 7 times, right? Don't go overboard, but make sure that what you tell me is complete. And okay, if I'm really pressed, it probably needs to be longer than a page of text, because you need an introductory paragraph, you need a body paragraph at least, and you need a conclusion paragraph, but really you need more than one body paragraph. Okay, so but it depends how long it's going to be, depends on what graphs you decide to use, what format you decide to use, and so forth. I also don't really give them a rubric. This is what I give them, because I want them to find that story in the data and find a way of telling that story. And everybody comes up with different stories. And that makes my reading a whole lot more interesting, I have to tell you. And as I said, I've had some fascinating short stories that people have written. Some students don't take this very seriously, and I get a 2.5-page paper from them. And yes, they answer the question. Yes, they technically do everything I asked, and it's the most minimalist thing you've ever seen. I also have some students, probably 2/3 of the students, will turn in somewhere between 6 and 10 pages. Yes, some of that are graphs, but they tell a complete story. I actually had one person, I think he turned in a 20-page short story a few years ago. Now, he was striving to be the longest short story I'd ever gotten, longest paper I'd ever gotten, but it was a complete short story. Okay. All right, so that's the first paper. Let's see, what else did I want to say about? Oh, I also tell them that I am very willing to read drafts. I'm not going to go over a draft with a fine-tooth comb, but I will absolutely read a draft and give them a sense for whether they're headed in the right direction or not, whether they've got, what they're most concerned about is that telling a story versus giving statistical facts. Or as I like to call it, a statistical travelogue. First, I looked at this histogram, and then I looked at those numbers, and then right? And so often students will give me their paper and ask me just to make sure that they're headed in the right direction. It's also been a wonderful opportunity to work with a quantitative reasoning studio and the writing studio on campus. So these are our two tutoring centers. And our studios are very happy to work with students together. So in regular times, they can make an appointment with both studios at the same time, and they will have somebody from writing studio and quantitative reasoning studio and the student together looking at the paper at the same time, thinking about, have I addressed the statistical issues, but have I also addressed those in a way that people can understand, and is my writing tight and complete? The one thing that I have not yet figured out is how to get them to proofread it. I spend a lot of time talking to students about proofreading. I spend a lot of time talking about what appearances mean. If you give something to your boss that has lots of mistakes in it, how does that represent you? Some students get it. Some students really, really struggle. And I will say, probably a quarter of my students struggle with writing just in general, which is part of the reason why I went to this method, so that I knew they were struggling with writing in a academic style paper. I thought was going to be even harder for them. All right. So a second, just so that you have another idea of the kinds of papers that I assign, a second first paper. This one I just created this year. This comes from a data set that was just published in the Journal of Statistics Education, JSE. Okay, just published in the last year or so, I think. And it's data from a high school diving competition. And so in this case, the observations are individual dives. So there are 11 rounds, and each of 25 divers dived in each of those 11 rounds. So we've got 25 times 11 different dives. Some variables are the same, obviously, for the same person. So their overall meet score is the same across all 11 dives. So I told students to sort of ignore those variables and said we wanted to look at actual individual scores. We have scores from each of 5 judges, and then we have the average score that was how the dive was eventually scored, which is the average of the middle 3 judges. So I told them they could either pick the end judging score for the divers, or they could pick a particular judge and look at the scores that a particular judge did. And they had things like how difficult was the dive forward facing or backward, or I don't remember all of these variables in here. So was it a pike or a tuck or a free dive, and so forth. So this is just another example of the kind of, this is all the same kind of thing. I'm looking for, again, descriptive statistics only. And they have, I didn't say this, I give them a week to do this. So I give it to them on, in this case, I give it to them on the Friday of the end of the first week, which is when we finished covering descriptive statistics, just about, and it's due the following Friday. The second paper, I said originally I was doing 2 descriptive papers. The first one was worth 40 points. The second one was worth 60 points. Ultimately, I decided I really wanted to get inference in here yet. And so I have now gone to 2 papers. They're each worth 50 points. The first one is descriptive and the second one is inference. And so as an example of an inference paper, this is a data set. This actually comes from Brad Hartlaub. I guess I can say that. It's one of the data sets that we have published in our Stat2 book. And it's data that he collected on himself for several years when he was actively training for marathons. And so it's all of his runs over a several-year period. And we have how the date of the run, how many miles he ran, what brand of shoe he wore that day, although that's only for the later portion of the data set, how many minutes he ran, therefore what was the pace per mile, was it a short run or a long run, so 5 miles or less, or more than 5 miles, where it was in his running career. Between you and me, I think this is when he turned 40, but I'm not positive about that. So that, and so again, I said, in this case, explore the time minute and the pace minute. And in this case, when we're talking about inference, I give them a list of a bunch of questions, and I've come up with questions that can be answered with different kinds of inference, right? Is it 1 sample? Is it 2 sample? Is it means? Is it proportions? Is it correlations or regression? I give them a bunch of, maybe 6 or 7, and I tell them that they have to answer at least 2 of those questions in their paper using both inference and descriptive statistics. The interesting thing, and what is driving me bananas, is that I can say that till I'm blue in the face. It's written here. When we are in person, they have this piece of paper in their hot little hands because I give it to them. It's also on our Moodle page. And I say this probably 4 different class periods between when I give them the assignment and when it's due. You must remember 2 questions, inference and descriptive statistics for both. And I don't know what is so hard about that. I typically have between 1/3 and 1/2 the students don't follow those directions. It was especially bad first term this year when I was all online. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that it was an intro stat course that was all online. I think more that, because that class did not do particularly well anyway. More than half of the students failed my second exam, which is incredibly unusual for me. And only 2 to 4 of them would have their cameras on at any given class period. And I think there were a lot of people who were joining and then walking away. So that's a whole other ball of wax, I guess. But even when we are in person, I still have this problem of getting them to follow directions. And so I'm open for suggestions about how to say that in 17 different languages or something. I don't know what the answer to that is. So that's basically how I use writing in my class, or at least this portion of writing. I still have on my exams, there are still short answer and essay questions, particularly when we're talking about collecting data, or when I'm trying to see if they've gotten an understanding of a concept, I never personally never ask for definitions, but when we're in person and it's closed book, I am very likely to say, what's the difference between the mean and the median, and when would you use which one, right? Getting at the concepts, but not wanting them to just, throw out the definition, right? Just memorize the definition and write it down. So by and large, the big thing that I have found to be really helpful is this whole use whatever medium you want to write, right? I am very careful to say, I don't care if you're writing a letter, you're writing a blog post, you are still going to use proper grammar, spelling, capitalization, punctuation. The one time I will give you a pass on that is if you are writing a short story and it is quotations from characters in your story, right? So if you've got somebody who's not speaking the Queen's English, that's fine, I get it. But otherwise, I do expect, and I'm not an English professor, but I sure will grade you on, I know a full sentence when I read it. And I know spelling and I know comma rules. So I guess that's really what I wanted to say. And I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any. I assume that's how we go from here.
Yeah. I wrote down a couple questions, Anne. And I have a suggestion possibly for your dilemma with like them not doing this assignment and like, not answering 2 questions or whatever. So maybe, and this is just a formatting of the assignment. If a simple formatting of the assignment makes a difference, then that's great, right?
Right.
So maybe putting like the questions like in a table where they can put a checkbox and did they answer the question yes or no?
That's a good idea.
And so then it's kind of separate and they're like, okay, yes, I did this one and I did this one.
Yeah. Good idea.
You'll have to let me know if it works.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you have any examples of some unique papers or?
No, because I turn them back.
Okay. Yeah. Good point.
and at least when we are in person, I ask them to hand them in on paper because old eyes and computer screens. I much prefer to, in fact, even in the pandemic, I splurged and bought myself an Apple Pencil, and I actually handwrite my comments right on their papers on my iPad. And so, no, I don't have. Well, I guess I would have some from first term, but I don't think any of those were noteworthy.
But you find the engagement. The reason I bring this up is because, there's more than likely we're going to go virtual before we're in a trimester, which our exams would be the week after Thanksgiving. And it's very possible that my school is going to be in a total virtual situation here quickly. So I was thinking, all right, how do I give some type of an assessment that's kind of unique that obviously I don't have the capabilities of online assessments at our school right now to kind of, get some feedback that kids are learning something without having them take a picture of their exam and I'm watching them take it over a Google Meet for the next 2 hours because that might be what we're looking at. So you find engagement.
I do. It's the hard thing is to find data sets that they will engage with. I have to say the Faithful Faces one is one they engage with. That's one they can they find interesting. The diving one seemed to be okay. It's not a sport that some people know about, so it was a little hard for some people, I think. They don't know how. I kind of figured that everybody watches the Olympics, but maybe not. And so there were some that was a little bit harder. I have the rest of my data sets are not quite as exciting. I've got one that looks at education data from the state of Iowa, but it's from 2008 or something, right? I need to update some of my data sets. I do have one that I got from Rosemary Roberts, who's now retired from Bowdoin College, that looks, it's data on the pesticide fenthion, which is illegal now in the United States, or at least in most cases in the United States. Rosemary is British. Her sister is a chemist in Greece. where they grow olives and olive oil. And so this was a study on, could we let the olives sit for a year and see if the phanthine degrades away, or let the olive oil, I guess, sit and see if the phanthine degrades away, so that then the olive oil is safe to consume. And I had one student do a murder mystery short story on that. It was really great. So finding a good data set, I think that's really the key.
I mean, just again, like the murder mystery, because I have some very creative writers, but yet at the same time, people that don't write very well. And when you look at the paper, what are you looking for? If there's no rubric, so
right. So and this answers Chris's question. Yes, no, I don't have a rubric, maybe I shouldn't admit this. So when I grade these papers, I read and comment on all of them. And then I go back and I put them in piles and think about, okay, yes, these were the A papers and these were the B papers and these were the C papers. And that's really how I grade them. And I know that's not best practice, but that's the way it just works for me. I guess when I grade them, I am looking for, is what they said about the statistics correct? Once or maybe twice. I've done this now at least 10 years. And that means probably close to 800 students at this point, because I teach 3 sections a year to 24 students. Only once or twice have I had somebody who basically made up things from the variable names, right? They didn't even use the numbers, or they didn't use anything reasonable. But that's, like I said, that's only 1 or 2 students out of like 750 or 800. But they don't always say realistic things about it. They don't always look at the right things, or they might talk about a correlation when we're talking about a categorical variable, right? I mean, so those are things that I'm looking for. I am looking for, does it hang together? Have they told me a complete story? And by story, I don't mean short story, or I mean, have they started at the beginning and ended at the end? And what do they have a thesis? And did they follow through on that thesis? Are they focusing on the context of the data instead of doing the statistical travelogue? And in the end, how many grammatical, typo kinds of mistakes did they make too? I'm not sure I would be quite as picky about that in high school, but they're in college, damn it. And in fact, technically they've had their freshman writing course, because that's the prerequisite for our statistics course. That and high school algebra 2 are the prerequisites. And they just haven't been taught how to proofread. And so that's something that I really get on them about. Does that kind of answer your question?
So in essence, you're talking about the communication piece.
Yep.
Not the regurgitation of just facts.
Exactly.
Present to somebody that doesn't know anything about statistics, and you're trying to enlighten them on some context using statistics as a way to enlighten them on whatever the story.
I do tell them they don't have to describe what a histogram is. They don't have to explain what a mean is, right? They can assume that the person reading it has rudimentary statistical knowledge, but they have to explain the conclusions they're making and drawing, and how they're drawing those conclusions from the data, and why that's important in context.
So it's very more practical than obviously a textbook situation.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes. And that's kind of my goal.
Right.
So everybody's doing their paper individually, right? You don't do any group papers. Okay.
Right.
And then I know you said you were looking for like the 2008 data set was too old. So where do you get most of your data sets from?
That's a good question. And I am not great at this. I did, I think first term this year, I certainly found a new data set for the first paper. I'm not sure I found a new data set for the second paper. I have about 6 or 8 data sets for each one, and I have finally gotten smart and put together a spreadsheet so that I keep track of when I assigned them, so that I can wait at least 2 years between when I assign them. To find data sets, JSE is a really good, the JSE, Journal of Statistics Education data sets and stories section is really good. And so to find JSE, go to the amstat.org, which is the ASA website, and go to journals, and then the Journal of Statistics Education. There used to be a nice site on there that had just a list of all of the data sets that had been submitted over the years for data sets and stories. When Taylor and Francis took over, that got lost in the shuffle, but they are working on it, and it is supposed to be back up sometime in the relative soonness. I don't know what that means. So what I just do is I open up one of their issues and just scroll through the table of contents and see if there's a data sets and stories article, and then go to that and see if it's a data set that I can use. That's where I got the diving data set from. I have also the education one from Iowa. That one, I was driving to work one day listening to NPR, and I heard something.
Oop. Sorry, you're good.
Okay. I heard something about the Annie E. Casey Foundation and their educational data. And so I just went out to their website, and this was, 10 years ago. And it was easy to, I don't know, download it, I think. I don't think it was scraping or anything. And then I augmented it a little bit with information that I got from some government site in Iowa, I think, that gave me other information about the counties. Other good places to look for data. Several cities have large data repositories. So New York City has a really large data repository. You can find data on just about anything you want. Chicago has one. The US Census Bureau, you can download lots of interesting data sets from. I've been less successful at the CDC, but I know other people have talked about how helpful the CDC website is, and that you can get lots of interesting data there. San Francisco, I think, is another city that has lots of data sets on their some sort of government page. And the New York City one is the one I've used the most, and they have it divided out into what kind of topic are you interested in. So are you interested in transportation data? Are you interested in education data, medical data or health data? They have restaurant report, certification reports, or the inspection reports on restaurant data. They have police data. I mean, you name it, they have it. And it's fairly straightforward to download. Does that help?
No, that definitely helps. I'm always looking for some more interesting data sets to use with my students for good examples that they'll be interested in.
Yep.
So recently I started to subscribe to Gallup, and so I get like a email ping. And there was one that I just read about an experiment that was done related to COVID vaccines, like asking people, would you be willing to take the vaccine if blah, blah, blah. And so there was like the wording was changed to see if they could word it in such a way that they would have more people more likely to take it, type of thing. So it was done as an experiment. So, and I like that because it talks about the methodology and things like that. So, but just finding interesting studies that have been done, whether they're observational studies or experiments, and then also looking for real world data that they can manipulate and use on their own to create your stories.
So textbooks are also a good place. Some textbooks are also a good place to look. I know that with the Stat 2 book, We were very careful in 99.9% of cases to use real data sets. That's where I got the Faithful Faces data set from, for instance. So there might be data sets there now, whether maybe not for the writing assignment, but there might be data sets there that you can use for other things as well. The Lock 5 book for the intro course, they were very careful in most of their now practice this technique exercises and all of their examples to use real data. And I've gotten some interesting data sets from that book as well.
I don't know. If any, yeah, I was gonna say, are there any other questions in the chat? I don't think I saw any other questions in the chat.
Maybe I'll just throw this out there with those that are here before we wind up for the day. Just those that are teaching right now virtually, how do you notice a difference in the kids from before? Are you seeing a gap in their not their achievement necessarily, but their demonstration of what they know? I mean, I'm 8 weeks in now as a teacher, where last year as a high school teacher, everybody was basically, given a pass. I mean, we were pretty much done anyway at the course at the end of March. We were lucky just to review for the AP exam. So now it's flipped. And my pacing is the same as where it was in previous years in terms of where we would be in the course. But I do struggle with the fact that I don't think my kids are giving as much, giving it their all, so to speak, when they only see us twice a week, let alone if they don't see us at all. The human element that you miss. So anybody have any ideas, or if they're facing some of those things, or they've got ideas that maybe help, motivate kids through these things? Because the reality is this is probably the way it's going to be the rest of the year. It's just not a short-term thing. Because you want them to me, you can't use it as a crutch, right? They still have to do their best, but it's still pretty new for a lot of these students. This is still, I don't know if they all believe this is really what's going on in terms of, in my case, the days they have off are not necessarily used to study for the material the next day. It's a day off. Any suggestions?
Are you doing hybrid so that when they're not there, they're in Zoom with you or in Google Meets with you?
Well, my AP kids are in with me on the days off. So basically I flip the class and then they all meet together and they have study buddies. 2 kids that are sitting home are in a Google breakout room with 2 kids that are in my room.
Right.
So I can kind of, hear the dialogue. All right. Some days I got to stagger it because it's just, I need to see them personally to kind of just talk through some things. The thing that's the biggest thing right now is that there's a lot of online activities you can do, but like for example, just doing a simulation where you have to just put things on a card, have them shuffle the cards and look at the differences, whatever, those kinds of things. That's missing, the real tactile stuff. And, but I still think that, it's just the motivation for particularly the high school kids who aren't used to doing this. I mean, I don't know where we're going to be next year. I don't want to make excuses for them, but I'm starting to see a little, maybe it's just because we're in it for 8 weeks right now. I don't know, does anybody teach high school or you've dealt with this before, how to motivate?
I'll say one thing that I've noticed, but then again, it's a different group of students as well. So in addition to teaching elementary statistics, so that's our 1 semester statistics course, I teach the math for elementary education majors, and then I also teach a business calculus class. And my math for elementary education majors is actually 4:15 to 5:15 Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which is a tough sell on a Friday. But they show up and like they do, which is pretty crazy. And they'll work together in breakout rooms and things like that. And for that one class, for whatever reason, I really got into when I would let them in the main room from the waiting room, I would, say, welcome to class, like Stacy or thanks for being here today, Chris, or, welcome to class, Anne. And I would always greet them by name. And at one point, I commented that like everybody was here on a Friday, and one of them unmuted themselves and said, well, you're like one of the only professors that greets us by name. Like you're like the only, like, and not that I have a connection where I could maybe talk to them on the street if I recognize them necessarily, but
Right.
We do tend to have a little bit of a conversation as they're coming in about how things are going, the weather, whatever, a little bit of COVID, but not too serious. And it's definitely hard to make those connections, but I feel like in the classes that I've tried to make those connections, the students are putting in more of an effort. Not all of them consistently,
Right.
but with that one class, I've noticed it more.
So I don't know if it's the difference between Stat 1 and Stat 2. It might very well be. But in Stat 1, as I said, I had 21 students, and between 2 and 4 of them would have their camera on at any given time. In Stat 2, I also had 21 students, and between 2 and 4 of them would have their camera off at any given time. And while I am quite sure that they weren't all paying attention all the time, they aren't in the classroom either, right? I mean, right. And they were all muted. I figured out pretty quickly that 3 of the guys were roommates because I'd see them talking to each other, right? But I felt like I had a lot more buy-in from the class that had their cameras on. And the first term was horrible when I was teaching Stat 1 because I'd never had any of those students before. And so I quite honestly, I would not recognize but about 2 or 3 of them if I were walking across campus right now. I would have no idea I'd had them in my class. And what I learned in the second term, so first at the beginning of the second term, I said, guys, what I learned is that I learn a lot about you as we're all entering the classroom time. I may not be interacting with you individually, but I'm watching you interact with other people, and I'm learning about your personalities, and I'm learning about you. And we are interacting, we'll have a quick word or two together, and I learn a lot about you that way. I learn about you when I watch you as I'm teaching. Facial expressions, body movements, right? It gives me a sense for how lost you are or how much you're understanding. And I think, I'd like to think because of having that conversation, more of them had their cameras on. And one of the things that I learned was that I probably went way too fast the first term because I discovered very quickly, even though I was writing on my iPad as a whiteboard, they were writing far longer than I was. And I was realizing I was having to stop because I talk fast and I guess write fast and let them catch up. And I didn't do that first term because I had no idea that was happening. And so I guess now part of it was Stat 2. I'd had some of those students before. More of them will have chosen that class because it was something they were interested in. But I think one lesson is to talk to them about engagement and talk to them about that this is a two-way street, right? It's not just them listening to you. You need to be able to, teaching is an active profession, I guess. Right. Theatrical, that's the word I'm looking for, right? So in some ways it's theatrics, and we need an audience to be our best. And so I don't know if that will help you at all. Around here, hybrid means some of the students are in the classroom and some of them are not, but those that are not are on Zoom watching the instructor and the whiteboard and so forth. And I think that helps some because then you can say, if you are on Zoom, please have your camera on so I can be seeing you or whatnot.
Yeah, in my situation, I don't have the capability for that. So I am in essence doing video notes the night before.
Right.
And then use the time that they're in class basically to work through the problems so that there's some dialogue kind of thing. And I wish I had, basically I'd be live streaming my class. Mm-hmm. That would be the ultimate then it was live feedback, But anyway, yeah,
Well, good luck.
yeah, we're all in together. So anything else?
Well, I don't have any other questions. Are there any other questions from anybody else? All right, I'm going to stop the recording here in a second, but first I want to say thank you, Anne, for sharing tonight. We
You should have
really
stopped
appreciate.
sharing a long time ago. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you very much for sharing tonight. We definitely appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I was telling Lee, I think I'm going to use some of that writing, those ideas soon, so appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Feel free to shoot me questions if you all have them.
I will. And Mr. Olson, in a couple, 3 weeks, we'll be ready to roll.
All right.
All right.
Okay, well.